as we speak, well, not literally as we speak, but between the day that just passed, this is Friday, and tomorrow, Saturday, there are talks going on, ongoing negotiations in the Middle East between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. They're having this meeting in Abu Dhabi. They are trying to find a way to end the war, is what's being publicly said. Now, of course, what is being publicly said and the actual intentions of the parties involved can be very different. But we can get a little bit from this, a little bit about the intention of those involved from the parties that have been sent, like who is being sent by each side. Now, before we do that, though, I do want to acknowledge that this right here is the undoubtedly biggest step towards ending the war that the negotiations have ever taken. Now, I'm putting an asterisk with that the negotiations have ever taken, because giving Ukraine the data on Russian oil refineries might be a more impactful step forward towards ending the war. Like there are other things that were actually done to change the conditions, to change the board as it's seen, that gets us closer to an end to the war, outside of this type of sometimes more symbolic negotiation pathway, where this isn't something that changes the framework. This is something that is, you're taking a procedural step forward, less than changing how the rules are played or the factors involved. But this is still a significant step forward on the diplomatic front. There have been no talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States directly in a trilateral fashion since the war began. Now, when Donald Trump got into office, he said he wanted to end the war in 24 hours. He wanted to end it very quick. And so one of the things he demanded was a meeting between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine so they could just sit down, talk it out, and resolve it. But the Russians refused to meet with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians agreed to go to Istanbul. The Russians then, after, at one point even saying that Putin might go to Istanbul, kind of get called on that. And then they end up sending a lower level delegation instead, which seemed to mostly lecture the Ukrainians on history rather than actually get us anywhere closer to ending the war. Now, this process has repeated in different manners in Istanbul over and over again. And a lack of ability for the United States to get us all in the same room has led Donald Trump trying a lot of different pathways, trying to just get big concessions that are just not possible for the people involved on the ground. Like the locals will not allow their homes to just be negotiated away so easily. He has tried to get the Ukrainians to agree to a ceasefire. They did. Then he tries to get the Russians to agree to a ceasefire. They do. And then they immediately violate it when you talk about the energy ceasefire, where they try to get them to agree to a general ceasefire and they reject it completely. And so Trump drops the idea of a general ceasefire. And so there's been all these steps forward, steps back, attempt this way, attempt that way, shuffle this way, shuffle that way, and it's gotten nowhere. There's no ceasefire. There's no peace deal. And compared to the first day of this administration, 368 days ago, we are nowhere closer to seeing the end of the war from a diplomatic front. We have made no progress on negotiations besides narrowing down the disagreements to the areas that we already knew the disagreements were at. It's really baffling every time to hear J.D. Vance or some fucking other dumb suit get up and say, my God, these negotiations have been tough, I tell you what, but we have gotten a lot of progress done. We have now narrowed it down to just issues of territory and security guarantees. Oh, so you mean the biggest issues? We've just narrowed down the biggest issues between the America and the Soviet Union to capitalism and communism. Yeah, it seems to be a significant issue. It seems to be a significant issue. And so, of course, this was the issue that we said before that it was going to be a big problem, and it's still a big problem. So they haven't made any significant progress. This is progress because before now, the Russians refused to meet with the Ukrainians in the same room as the Americans because they didn't want to give them a certain dignity. They still deny Donald Trump going to these meetings or higher level officials going to these meetings, because if you look at this, the people who are being sent are Russian military officials. No, no like diplomatic officials, no civilian officials, just intelligence officials. Let me read you the people that the Russians have sent. The team they are sending is not led by the Kremlin's point man to the talks, diplomat Yuri Yushchenkov, but will instead be headed by the GRU military intelligence chief, Admiral Igor Kostyukov, who is a top spy and a big fish in Russia, and went to the Istanbul talks last year, but has not led the public process before. Now, Ukraine is sending a mixture of civilian diplomats, security officials. I know Zelensky's chief of staff and former intelligence chief Budanov, he's been sent there, which the Americans took quite positively. And of course, the United States has sent the tag team duo of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Now, Steve Witkoff being anywhere near these talks, I do not think is positive for their possibility of success due to his inexperience and his lack of knowledge of really anything in reference to the war. I mean, if you listen to him talk about the war at length, and he will show his ignorance plenty. Jared Kushner, I'm more worried about a profiteering point of view. I'm worried about what is the interest that actually he has at stake, that he cares about. I'd like to hope that it's not about profiting, but considering that it's his college buddies that are in front in line to get on the ground floor for reopening economic deals with the Russians, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. Either way, the big difference here between a meeting where I would think the Russians are genuinely angling for peace to get to the cut to the chase, skip all the tranquility around it, get straight to it. The reason why I don't think that the Russians yet are serious about peace, and this isn't an indication that the Russians are serious about peace, is the people that they send. If you're sending intelligence officials, but you're not sending civilian officials and other officials who would actually have the power to stop the firing, to stop the shooting, to stop the war, then all they can do is talk. All they can do is offer a position that is the Russian position, which they have been offering for the last 368 days, their reiterated maximalist position, listen to the Ukrainian position, and eventually communicate the Ukrainian American position backwards towards the West. I mean, back towards Moscow. So there's nobody there that can make a decision to say call upon a ceasefire or take any on-the-ground decisions that lead to a de-escalation of hostilities. That is something that can only be done behind the walls of the Kremlin by Vladimir Putin, and those decision makers are not there. Those decision makers are not there. So this could be one step forward that Putin intends to later take another step forward on top of that, but that's going to take time. And so I don't see no rush from Vladimir Putin to immediately end the war or to see that this talk leads to an end to the war in the next month, just that he wants to advance the process of negotiations. And so the process of negotiation for the first time has been advanced. Funnily enough, this was actually an idea put forward by the Ukrainians in Davos to Donald Trump that then was sprung on the Russians. And I am of the suspicion that the Russians had this probably at their feet as a surprise, not expecting it, and probably jumped on it after Donald Trump has shown his certain unpredictability on the world stage as of recent, hoping to keep this process going, knowing that agreeing to have these talks don't necessarily mean agreeing to any other preconditions. And considering that right now the reports indicate that the main issue dividing both sides is still territory, is still the Russians demanding that the Ukrainians give up the rest of the Donbass, give up the city of Konstantinivka, give up the rest of northern Pokrovsk, Mirorod, give up Kramatorsk, give up all these different locations that people are, living in or has been razed to the ground by the Russian army in the case of Pokrovsk and Mirorod. But Kramatorsk, there's still like 100,000 people that live there. And why should the Ukrainians agree to displace any more people than the Russians already have? So that's going to be a big issue between both sides. And if that's not going to be resolved, I'm interested in seeing how Trump's going to cut. Because I've seen pressure from the Trump administration towards the Ukrainians on giving up that territory, which sets a bad precedent and also doesn't make sense when it comes to rewarding the Russians. It's one thing to say, look, the Russians control that, so they have that for now. what can you do about it? You know, even if you could say maybe there's something that could be done about it, you know, you can at least understand that logic. To make the Ukrainians give up more territory instead of taking the approach that Trump promised on the campaign trail, undermining not only the country's credibility, but also Trump's personal credibility as that risk taker, that guy who comes out and could go in any direction. He said, whatever side holds up negotiation, whatever side ceases the fighting along the line of contact, I will bring among them immense pressure. On the Ukrainians, I'll cut everything off. On the Russians, I will surge aid. No aid has been given. And I think that doesn't undermine only the country's credibility, that undermines Trump's credibility as that wild man, which I don't always necessarily think is a good thing, by the way. I think a lot of times is a bad thing. I think people not being able to predict what you could do could lead to them being naively hopeful that they might be able to get away with something that they otherwise might not be able to get away with. Either way, I don't think that this is a big step towards peace. I don't think this is a big step towards a cessation of the guns firing. I think this is a baby step towards talking. This is the thing that should have happened on day one. If I was to take Trump seriously on ending the war, if we could redo everything, go all the way back to the first day of the Trump presidency, January 20th, 2025, second term, this is what should have happened on January 21st in Oman or some other neutral third-party arbiter state. But instead, we got that 368 days later. 24 hours. 24 hours. Maybe he meant it biblically. A biblical 24 hours.